Hello there, here's another A-Level Maths video. We're looking at the Pure Maths Year 1 content, and in this video we're going to look at section 2.2 of the textbook, which is to do with completing the square. Now maybe you've heard of completing the square before, maybe you haven't. Either way, that's fine, but what we'll do to start off this video is I'm going to ask you to do a bit of expanding some brackets and simplifying some expressions. So you've got two there which involves numbers, and then the final one there involves a bit of algebra. So pause the video, have a go at that, and restart when you're done. Okay then, so here's what we should have done. So if we have, for example, x plus 7 all being squared, now of course what that means is it means we've got x plus 7 multiplied by itself, right? So x plus 7 times x plus 7. X times x gives us x squared. X times 7 gives us a plus 7x. Then 7 times x gives us another plus 7x. 7 times 7 gives us 49. And we can do a little bit of simplifying because we can put the 7x and the 7x together to make a 14x. So that's our answer there. Okay, so hopefully that was pretty straightforward for us. I won't go through the details in as much detail for the other ones here, but I'll just write down the answers. X minus 11 all squared. Your final answer for that one should have been x squared minus 22x plus 121. And then finally the one which involved a bit of algebra, x plus p all squared. Expand those brackets and collect the terms together. You should have ended up with x squared plus 2px plus p squared. Okay, so I want to show you something here which I think is going to be quite useful for us in what we've got to come up in the rest of this video. If I take this this expression here, so I know that this is true for all values of x and p. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write that with a different symbol in here. So have you seen this symbol before? It's like an equal sign, but it's got three lines to it, and that means that the expressions on each side are equal for all values of x. Okay, so not just some value of x like an equation we're trying to solve. This is equal for all values of x and indeed all values of p here. So each of those variables there. So that's a symbol that you might see, and I'm going to start using it just in case you're unfamiliar with it. So don't be too put off by that. Just remember that it means it's true for all values of x. Now, I'm just going to do a bit of rearranging of this because I'm going to just take the p squared here and I'm going to subtract p squared from both sides of this. So this is still always true for all values of x and all values of p. And I've ended up with something here which takes my sort of expanded quadratic expression here and writes it in a different form. Okay, and this is going to lead into this idea of completing the square, which is what this video is about. So have a look at what's on the screen. You'll see I've put the result there that we've just found. This is true for all values of x and all values of p, which is why we've got that equal symbol there, which isn't an equal symbol. It's actually got three lines to it, but it's telling us that it's true for all values there. And I want you to think about the question and see if you can make the connection. We've got an expression like x squared plus 10x, and we want to write it in this alternative form. Then what are the values of the b and the c going to be there? Have a think about it, see if you can make that connection, and restart the video once you've got an answer. Okay, so what did you come up with here? Well, this is the result that we're making use of here. I've written it out here again. And what we've actually got here is we've got x squared plus 10x. So comparing it with what we've got up here, we can see that the 2p, which is the coefficient of x, has got to equal 10. Okay, so 2p equals 10, which of course means that p equals 5. So in other words, we have to divide this x coefficient by 2. And then we can just take that number here, in this case 5, and just substitute it into what we've got here. So this is going to give us x plus 5 squared minus 5 squared here, okay, which obviously I could write that as 25. So the values of my constants b and c, b is going to equal 5 and c is going to equal 25. Now, I don't want you to sort of worry too much about sort of the values we ended up with here. What I want you to focus on is the process that we went through to get that. We had to take the coefficient of x and divide it by 2, and then that number ended up here. And then we had to take that number that we just written down squared and subtract that away. And what we've done there is we have done something called completing the square. We've taken our quadratic expression and we've written it in a particular form which is called completed square form. The details there are on the screen. So this is a process which we need to be able to do. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, why might we want to do this? And that's a question which I think is going to be answered a bit later on. There's a few different places where completed square form is really useful to us. For this video though, what we're really focusing on is the process of getting it into that form so that later on when we want it in this form, we know what to do. So why don't we have a look at an example here of this in action. Here's an example on the screen which we'll have a look at together. I'll show you how it works. So we've got our result here which we're going to make use of. This is going to allow us to write this in completed square form. So what have we got? We've got x squared minus 6x plus 32. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at these first two terms here. Okay, because that I'm going to compare with my result that I'm using here. You can see here that the x coefficient is going to be 2 times the number I've got here. So I'm going to have to divide this coefficient by 2. Now this happens to be a negative coefficient, but that's okay. We can cope with that. So it means that this first two terms here are going to become x plus a negative 3 here. I'll just write x minus 3. Can you see where the 3 comes from? I've just divided that coefficient by 2. And then I have to subtract from that p squared. And here I'm going to be careful because again I've got a negative coefficient, so my value of p is negative 3. I'm going to subtract the negative 3 being squared. Can you see what I'm doing? Now in this particular case I've got a plus 32 there as well, so that hasn't gone anywhere. I've still got that to deal with. And now I can just simplify what I've got. So the negative 3 squared is going to be a positive 9. And then I can collect these constant terms together. And I'm going to end up with plus 23 there. And there I have written my expression here in its completed square form. Okay, your turn now. Here's one for you to do. Looks very similar to the one we've just done here. Go through the same process and write that one in completed square form. Let's check the answer then, to see if we agree with each other. So this one we've got x squared minus 4x minus 6. And what we'll do is we'll look at this coefficient of x here, which is negative 4. We'll divide that by 2 to get negative 2. And that's what has to go inside the bracket here. And then we have to subtract away that negative 2 being squared, and that's dealt with the first two terms. And then we still got the minus 6 to think about there, so we can't forget about that. That's still there. Okay, let's simplify what we've got. So the x minus 2 squared is still there. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. So we subtract that positive 4, and then we'll collect it together with the negative 6 here. And we end up with x minus 2 all squared minus 10. Did you get it right? Okay, so we're going to have a look at some more complicated ones now. So if you feel like you need to practice with that basic type, then of course there's questions in the textbook you can practice with. But we also need to know how to deal with these slightly more complicated situations. This one here is more complicated for a couple of reasons, but the main reason is we've got a coefficient in front of that x squared term. In this particular case, we've got 2x squared. As part of the expression here. So let's see if we can make use of what we need to do here. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a bit of factorizing. So I'm going to factorise that 2 out of that first two terms. And I'm going to end up with this. Okay, so does that make sense what I've done there? I've just taken the first two terms and I've factorised out the 2, which is the x squared coefficient. And now, inside the bracket, I can use the formula. Let me just get that back up again here. So this is the formula that we're going to make use of here, inside that bracket. Okay, let's go back to where we were. And so you can see what I'm going to do next. So inside the bracket, so I normally just put a great big bracket there and I'm going to work inside. Now, I need to take half of the x coefficient I've now got. Now this is 5/2, so okay, we've got a fraction involved here, but shouldn't cause us too many difficulties, I hope. So half of 5/2 is 5/4. And then we also have to subtract away the square of that number I've just written down, which is 5/4. Do you see how this works? So I've got to be super careful with the brackets and with the fractions, but now I can simplify what I've got. So if I now just sort of bring this to, actually no, first of all, let's deal with the minus 5/4 all being squared here. So what's 5/4 squared? Well, that's going to be 5 squared over 4 squared, which is 25/16. Okay, all right, so let's keep going with this. We can now expand out the 2 into the bracket here. So we're going to have 2 times all of this stuff is our first term. And then 2 times the negative 25/16, I think becomes negative 25/8. And we've still got minus 3 there to deal with. So that's still there. And then we can collect these constant terms together. Okay, let's just bring that up a bit so you can see that. There we go. Okay, and I think if we think of the 3 as being 24/8, then we can say that that's going to be minus 49/8 all together. Okay, did that make sense? Okay, so hopefully that made sense. If you need to go back and re-watch and think about it, pause the video and whatever, then please do. But when you're ready, here's one for you to have a go at yourself. Now, the x squared coefficient here happens to be negative, but that's not a problem. All you need to do is just remember to factorize out that negative term from the x squared and the x terms there as the first step of the process. Okay, pause the video, have a go at it, see how you get on. Okay, let's see how we did then. I've already made a start on my answer here. So the first step of the process is to take the negative 4 and factorize it out of the first 2 terms here. So we just end up with that x squared term with a coefficient of 1 inside the bracket. Okay, let's carry on. So inside the bracket, let's do the completing the square process. And I think we're just going to take the 2 here and divide that by 2. So we just end up with 1. And then we subtract away the 1 being squared. All right. Let's expand out the bracket here. So minus 4 times this whole thing here. This becomes that. 1 squared is, of course, just 1. So minus 4 times minus 1 here becomes a plus 4. Plus 7 is still hanging around. And then we'll collect the 4 and the 7 together to make an 11. And there we've written it in the form that we need. Okay, so how do you feel about this process? Hopefully we're getting on okay with it. Let's finish off this video by having a look at an example where we can use completing the square to do something. In this case, we're going to use completing the square to solve a quadratic equation. So we've already seen in the previous section and the previous video lots of different ways of solving quadratic equations. Well, here's another one. We can complete the square. Have a look at this one here. So on the screen, I've got the question here. Now I've already done the work, the first part here. I've taken my expression here and I've written it in completed square form. You can check my working. You can pause the video and have a look at that if you need to. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to try and solve the equation that's there, but we're going to use that completed square form. Okay, so the equation is 4x squared plus 24x plus 31 equals 0, but I could of course write that as 4 times x plus 3 squared minus 5 equals 0, because that completed square form there is exactly the same as the quadratic that we want to set equal to 0. Okay, makes sense? And now in this form, we don't have to do anything more complicated than just rearrange the equation. So let's do that and see what we end up with here. So let's add 5 to both sides. Okay, let's divide both sides by 4. Okay, what should we do next? We need to deal with the squared. Okay, so let's do that. Take the square root of both sides. And of course, if you remember from the previous video, we need to remember plus or minus there. So the square root of 5 is obviously root 5. Square root of 4 is 2. That's what we've got there. And then the final thing we'll do is we'll subtract 3 from both sides. And there we have our answer to the quadratic equation. We found the roots by completing the square. And here's your question then. So this is one for you to do exactly the same sort of thing as we've just been doing. Write the quadratic expression in completed square form, then use that to solve the equation. Okay, so hopefully you agree with my answer. I've written it out already on the screen here. So you should have ended up for the first part in completed square form. The whole thing becomes 3 lots of x minus 2 all squared minus 7. And then we take that and we put it into the equation. So there we are. Instead of writing this, we'll write this instead. And then we'll just rearrange the equation, and we should end up with something which looks a bit like that. Okay, so if you're new to completing the square, you probably want to practice that quite a bit. Exercise 2C and exercise 2D in the textbook, you're going to get lots of practice there. So please don't try and do the difficult ones before you've got the basic ones, but please do practice those, and I'll see you again next time.